Hey everyone, Phlashweb here. In this video I'm going to be talking about when and whether you should be hiring someone for your business. So let's think about whether first, whether you need to hire someone. In many cases, hiring someone is probably quite an expensive decision, or can be quite a cost consideration for your business. Some people might not want to hire someone because they don't want to scale their business any bigger than it is. They're comfortable with it, and in that case, fair enough, no need to hire someone if you're not resource constrained. You may still be able to scale your business, you may be able to systemize certain things, you may be able to outsource to different companies without hiring someone internally, which are all legitimate ways to scale and not burden yourself directly with cost. However, let's assume you decide that you do need to hire someone. Then comes the question of when. And there's two schools of thought, I think, at least from my experience. One is hire someone when you absolutely have to, when everything is at the red line and there's no other alternative but to hire someone, because you know you've reached capacity, you've done everything you can to get to that point. The second school of thought, and the one that I tend to lean towards, not sure whether, I think there's no one right answer for this, it just depends on your business, but for me, I sort of prefer the hiring someone at least in a part-time capacity ahead of the point where you're in serious red line trouble, because when you're in serious red line trouble you start to compromise your delivery of service. So I would say when you start to get to the point where you're getting a little bit frustrated, a little bit stressed, and then it's time to do some analysis on the kind of things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. If you don't have any analysis to start with, like you're not monitoring or tracking your time, start by doing that, because that's a very key prerequisite to know what you're able to then outsource. And one of the first things you can do when it comes to hiring someone is to hire someone that's flexible, or a freelancer, or a virtual assistant. Now, most people when they think about hiring is they think, you know, I've got to take someone on as an employee, full-time, part-time. Not necessarily true, depending on the business that you're doing. If it's a face-to-face business and it's based locally in your country, then you wouldn't take someone on virtual. Although in today's environment, then it's becoming much more of a common occurrence, right? Because people can't just go, well, now increasingly you can, but it's challenging having face-to-face meetings. So virtualized meetings is something becoming more common, and therefore having a virtual resource is also more common. So that brings to the point, where and how do you hire virtual resources? Well, there's lots of businesses and there's lots of places you can recruit from to get a virtual resource. It really depends on time zone, budget, what you're looking to resource. But what I suggest to start with, if you're at the point where you've grown your business to the stage where it's starting to stress you out, the amount of work you've got, and growing it seems more painful than the rewards of getting more income, then it's a very good time to start looking for someone. First thing is, can you get rid of your administrative, operational, procedural work? So that's where the analysis part comes in, I mentioned a few minutes ago. You need to start to understand what you have now that you can immediately outsource to somebody else. That might be a challenge in itself, because you may not have created any processes, it may all be within your head. And if that is the case, then what you need to do is follow a process of documenting, creating screen recordings, and creating the role spec for all the stuff that you don't want and can take up your premium time, if you like, that could be outsourced to somebody who essentially can perform a operational routine task that doesn't require your level of experience, let's say. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go and create these screen recordings. What you can do is hire someone and explain the process to them, and in explaining the process to them, you can record it and then refine the documentation as they perform the task, and get them to do screen recordings and instructions and documentation. And it won't be perfect the first few times, because trust me, everyone thinks they can explain things in amazing ways, or they can explain things in such simple terms and it's so obvious. So you are obviously going to have to refine the documentation as you go a little bit. Rarely people create great documentation or even great screen recordings from the get-go, but if you create a screen recording, it's typically quite self-explanatory, and you get less of a comeback for that sort of thing. So once you have created that documentation, then you need to find someone to hire. So now let's go back a step to the point where you're about to hire someone and you haven't created any documentation yet. Hiring is absolutely one of the most critical functions of growing a new business, right? If you don't get the hiring right, you can basically, there's a difference between hiring massive liability and hiring your greatest asset, and that is no understatement. I can tell you from experience, let's say. You may get someone with fantastic aptitudes, however, they may have none of the experience that you need. Or you may get someone with lots of experience and they have terrible aptitude. So you need to get the right combination of those things. It's not too much of a, it's not something you have to be too stressed about when you're hiring your first sort of low risk hire, but it is something that needs to be considered. And don't just, because you're so time strapped, think, oh my God, I've got to go with the first person. That is a mistake that many people make, and it puts them off hiring again, and it basically just becomes that liability that I was alluding to a second ago. So you need to have a hiring process, or if you trust and have a good referral from a company that can deal with hiring on your behalf, then go through a hiring company, because they'll just do it for you, and it's much more efficient. And typically they'll, if it doesn't work out, they'll hire someone else for you for free. So it's worth considering that route at least. If you are going to hire someone, make sure you have a process. Give them some testing, give them some assessment. Make sure you don't just hire the first person you speak to, because you assume that everyone can do basic tasks that seem so obvious to you. Because trust me, it's not always the case. So that's what I would say about hiring. So once you've made your first hire, you've got them on board, you've started creating some process documentation, it's still going to be a bit messy, right? You're still going to have like, oh, who's doing what, and a little bit of confusion, a little bit of chaos. That's where systems come into play. There's two tools I recommend, and I think I'm in the process of creating another video for these, but first thing, you need to create a role spec. If you didn't have one already because you didn't have time to create one, create it now, in terms of what are they doing. And I don't just mean a Word document, because Word documents are okay, but no one reads them. I mean, if you're a VA, they may read them, but like, and if it's their job, maybe they will. But most people don't. When it comes to procedural work, they find it more, well, let's put it this way. The easier you can make it for someone to read the process, the better. So reading a process isn't as good as seeing a process typically, like a screen recording. And the way you collect and organise that information is in the role spec. And the way you can organise a role spec together really well is by using something like Trello. And I'll share another video with you when it's released, which is essentially around how you link all of the different processes together in your business within one Trello board. All the screen recordings are there. They know exactly what they have to do. If you do lose that person, you can just bring someone else in and go, that's your spec, that's when you need to do it, that's what you've got to do. In you go. Seldom is it that fantastically easy, but but it gets a lot easier when you do it like that. The second tool you need to think about operationally is some time capture and screen recording, some monitoring, project monitoring, cost monitoring. Because when you're on your own doing your own business and you've got your own time to spend, it's only your time and you know what you're doing roughly, or at least you think you do, but the cost is flat because you pay yourself whatever you pay yourself. However, when you've got a new resource, you need to quite carefully track what they're spending their time on and how much it's costing you, because one, it means that they are more attuned to focusing on the specific task that they're tracking the time against, which is beneficial. The second thing is it allows you to accurately cost estimate a given month or a given project or a given task, and then you can work out what are the things that you can allocate to this person and leverage your time more effectively. Again, see, like, oh, that was really useful and it only cost X amount of money and I managed to generate X amount of business with that time. Now I can leverage some more things onto this person and hopefully follow the same equation. So those are the things that I would say you need to think about when you're going to hire someone, and whether you're going to hire someone. I could probably talk about this topic a lot longer actually, but hopefully that's helped, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.